Machine here, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. 20-minute video for 2 minutes worth of content. Gold.
On the 2nd of February in 2018, last year, kjaerbye, the Astralis player, signed to move to rival organisation North, and he has played there ever since. Now, due to the circumstances of the move at the time, where he signed on the same day that the other Astralis players assumed that he was going to, along with them, re-sign with Astralis for the upcoming year, there was bad blood between those players and him. They felt as though it was kind of like a snake move to not tell them or to lead them on into thinking he was going to be on their team. And obviously there's the extra circumstances, which are not kjaerbye's fault, which is that you had to finalise your roster for, I think it was ESL Pro League, so there was only a couple of days in which for them to find a replacement, since ESL Pro League still a big deal. It's an online league that means a lot for your org, and obviously it has the two big LAN finals each year. So understandably from the players, yeah, this is something which, you know, initially set the thing, it felt wrong to them. They had a little bit of bad blood. They felt like he didn't treat him the right way, or he wasn't as professional as he could have been, or maybe on a personal level they were friends with him and they felt like he fucked them over. It was definitely a shocking move, because obviously North was a worse team than Astralis. This is a big move to come out of nowhere. There was no indications this was going to happen at all, actually. Obviously, Astralis players thought they were just going to sign all 5 players. I hadn't heard anything behind the scenes. North actually kept it very well under wraps. Astralis then did go and get a player before the deadline. They ended up getting Magisk, who was off in Optic, a lineup that wasn't working out. It was the multinational lineup, if you remember, with Alu and Freiburg, etc. That was just breaking up. And within something like, I think it was 3 lands into having Magisk, this Astralis team that kjaerbye had left was the best team in CSGO, although obviously the rankings hadn't yet caught up, but just the eye test told you they were, how dominant they were, winning that DreamHack Masters Marseille, and they became one of the most dominant teams of all time. Incredible how many tournaments they were able to win, most of them throughout the year. They won the next major, obviously. They were incredibly dominant even over their peers, and they've obviously done insane things since. Meanwhile, North, except for DreamHack Masters Stockholm, generally underperformed, even at a tier 2 level. They didn't win most of the tier 2 lands they went to. They had very few big time placings, top 4s, finals in the big competitions. They basically had that one at DreamHack Masters Stockholm. And so as a result, the contrast of how extreme the difference was between how much better Astralis was and how much worse North was, even quite frankly, than the lineup, except for Stockholm, than they'd had the past year, which has still been making playoffs, sometimes still been having some decent enough results. It meant that, yes, understandably, people memed on kjaerbye and made up the old classic jokes of like, kjaerbye's the best GM in the Danish scene, or, you know, kjaerbye leaving Astralis was the best roster move of the year. You know, all these jokes that have a grain of truth in them, obviously, but they're more about having fun. Sometimes a bit mean, but it's fun at the expense of kjaerbye. Oftentimes he was criticised for this move. Obviously North was pretty terrible. He didn't play particularly well in North. Astralis got better. Astralis became the #1 team, which they hadn't been for most of the previous year in 2017. Sometimes on results, people did it. But one of the aspects I really don't get is the vitriol against kjaerbye for this move. Like acting like he's an idiot for making the move, like there was no logic behind the move, like it's obvious Astralis was going to succeed, that the fact that they have succeeded means that he's an idiot because if he'd have stayed there, he'd have shared in that success somehow. Like the notion that he is a snake or he's a piece of shit, or like the fact that he chose to do this move means he deserves bad results, and, you know, we should sort of laugh and enjoy that he's failed in this way. I actually find that whole element just quite unreasonable, really. Like, especially the tone and the kind of exaggerated nature of that kind of criticism. I don't really think that this scenario for me warrants that kind of vitriol, because let's look at the actual situation. Let's reflect upon the context and actually look at the time, if it made sense, look now what the situation is, and then kind of come to a conclusion of whether it's reasonable to be this kind of harsh on him. Because think about this. It's easy to look now at Astralis as the #1 team, but he wasn't leaving the #1 team. He was leaving Astralis when they were a top 4 to 5 team in the world, but they just bombed the major when they'd gotten Device back into their lineup, and they'd done that weird thing where they had Dupree as the main AWPer, and Device obviously had the same illness that actually has tortured him throughout most of 2018 when they've been dominant, a kind of stomach problem that's made him have difficulties eating. He's having kind of like an acid reflux type reaction. So they just bombed the major where they went 1 to 3, didn't make a Legends spot, which is the first time in the history of that core. 3 months plus earlier had been their last big international final, which was the E-League Premier event. Ever since then, they'd come 4th place at Epicenter, underwhelming way to lose. They'd been had Device injured, which then meant for the months after Epicenter, they basically didn't get to play with their proper lineup. They went to IEM Auckland, where initially Zonic played one of the games. Their first game, actually, they lost 11-16 to NIP. That meant that they ended up overall, when Device arrived, playing well enough to go. I think they went 3-1 with Device, so they ended up 3-2 in maps, and they were actually tied for second place, but due to tiebreakers, they didn't get a playoff spot, so already could have made playoffs even without Device for a game. That was the EPL Season 6 finals. Then they went, oh no, wait a second, what would that have been? No, IM Auckland, I think I said. Then they had the Blast Pro Series Copenhagen, the first ever one, where they actually finished runners-up and were one round, I think, from winning the tournament, in fact, on cash, where they had Dennis, the now an NIP player, then Fnatic player, as a stand-in, and they had no Device here. They actually shifted Dupree over to be the AWP, which is where that all first started. Dupree played amazingly there. It was a near MVP player, probably would have been the MVP if Astralis had won the tournament. They finished in second to last place at EPL Season 6 finals when they had to use Rubino as a stand-in for Device. That didn't go very well. They then used Rubino as a stand-in as well at ECS Season 4 finals. Right afterwards, they made top 4 there, and they actually managed to beat FaZe in a best-of-1 in the group stage with Rubino going ham there. So they'd had some okay results. They hadn't had Device for most of the time. At this point in time, FaZe and SK were very dominant. Like, they looked like clear-cut best teams. They also were teams that could obviously beat Astralis. FaZe particularly was getting Astralis when they played them. These were not, quite frankly, teams that looked like they were going to be toppled easily. And more importantly, Astralis themselves at this point in time weren't a team that did erratic results. They weren't going to have a one-off run like kjaerbye's North did at Drinkmaster Stockholm and then shit the rest of the beds, but then do incredibly at that one and win the tournament. Astralis actually was much more like a team that was very consistent. The teams they would beat and the teams they would lose to in terms of best of 3 play were very set, and as such, they weren't getting to the big trophies. And even worse, they were consistently getting those seconds off top 4s or making top 8 and having a shot to go top 4. Like, it was actually in some ways what we call in traditional sports no man's land. Like, it's a famous thing that happens in the NFL and NBA. If you have a team that makes the playoffs every year and you make it to the first or the second round every year, but you don't ever go any further, but you don't ever drop out the playoffs, in some ways that is the worst spot to be in as a franchise, because odds are you're not going to make the drastic move that could put you over the top and go to the top of the tournament or break it up entirely and start afresh. You're going to stick with it and hope that you can make that little incremental jump up, and sometimes you don't, and you realise later we blow our window, we had a chance to be better, and we're just stuck with kind of being good or being just above average and didn't realise we didn't have what it took to win. So actually at this point in time, gambling on going to North isn't actually that crazy. Like, you look at who they had in North at the time. They, at this point in time, Config had been benched and him and Cajun went to Optic. So they chose to bring in Mertz, who'd been good in the North Academy squad and people thought could be the next strong AWPer from Denmark. They had Valde, who'd been coming on strength to strength since he joined North, was looking like the best player in North. kjaerbye, obviously, at one point in time in Astralis had been a very strong player, particularly when his role had suited him and his individual form was there. So the logic was, with talent like kjaerbye, Valde and Mertz, if this all comes together, this could be a scenario like they had in 2018 with Team Liquid with their trio of stars, NRG with their trio of stars, Mouse Sports with their trio of stars. So not one of those players has to be the best in the world or even a top 5 player, but because you've got the trio, you can do it by committee, and this guy can have a great game on this map on this half, and on the other map on the CT half, the other guy has a great game, then on a totally different map that doesn't suit that original player, another player can go off, or just go off in terms of like, he has a bad game, but the other guy, 2 out of 3, just need to do well, and you've got some solid firepower. This wasn't that ridiculous a concept, actually. Like, it's not even that outrageous, the idea that this team could have been as good as Astralis was, or maybe even a little bit better. You didn't know what that lineup was like because it never played together. There'd never been a team vaguely like that in terms of those particular players together. Nobody knew if Astralis was going to keep going downhill. If newer teams getting their lineups together, teams like Mouse were coming on strong towards the end of the year, Cloud9 won the major, Fnatic was getting stronger, SK was going to go back to the Bolt side. You could have made a case that Astralis might have kept slipping down. They might have become the 5th to 6th team at that point in time. Now they wouldn't even have any chance. Meanwhile, kjaerbye wanted to gamble on going to North. Then you got to consider within Astralis, kjaerbye wasn't just leaving for no reason. Because of Dupree getting that Devices slot and having that amazing Blast Pro season, and then getting to be the full-time AWPer, and generally showing, once again, this is an all-time great player who'd actually been one of the more background figures during the time kjaerbye had been in Astralis. It actually makes a lot of sense that in Astralis, they were looking to Dupree, like, actually, we're going to give you more emphasis here, mate. You're going to get your roles in this team. And so, because they were essentially giving Dupree the entry rolls back, which is basically what kjaerbye did. They initially tried to do it together, but as you've seen, it makes a lot more sense to have Dupree do it. He is historically better at it. So remember, it was Dupree's sacrifice in the first place when they brought Glaive in to himself move into more of a lurk role and let kjaerbye be the entry fragger, that let kjaerbye shine and win that major MVP that many people granted him and win a major and have all that success. But you know what? Dupree's level got better towards the end of that time they were together in Astralis. Meanwhile, what happened to kjaerbye? His own form had fallen off. He was slumping to some reason, some degree. He was the guy who often made weird mistakes in the game that made him look a bit disconnected. So he himself diagnosed, like, this isn't a great look for me. And if they keep shifting things towards Dupree, it's only going to get worse for me. I'll probably get caught anyway, or the team just won't be as good. So joining North gave him a chance to go and reunite with MSL, his all in-game leader when they were in Dignitas together, who'd helped him become a star player, and he'd been at his very best individually in that team. I know he might look like it when he won the major, but go watch those early months of 2016 when he was in Dignitas. He was a really strong individual player. And quite frankly, I've got to say, as much as this is like I say, I can go either way on that move at the time, I just want to add this detail. You know what? It takes a lot of courage to go from a team that on paper is currently better than the team you're joining. Like, you might say, oh, it doesn't. You're an idiot to do that. No, his point is he was trying to do a courageous move that he actually thought could work and could improve the team that he joined. Like, that's courageous. To go from a team that's like good to a team that's got clearly better players doesn't take courage at all. Any idiot can do that. You're just trying to go and play with the better players. In fact, you could make the case that because he was going to North to be a star player, arguably the star player in MSL's system, and change his career and revitalise it and join a lesser team, but hope that him playing so well could mean they'd be better and they'd win championships, that's an incredibly admirable thing, actually, as opposed to just chilling in Astralis and just being someone in the back seat as Device and Dupree and Glaive drive you to a bunch of championships, and then you win the championships on your resume, but you didn't do it as a great individual player. I actually will applaud at least the drive, at least the imagination, the aspiration from kjaerbye to believe that he could be a greater player than just a background player, than just an Astralis player, to try and be the best Danish player, perhaps. There's a level to that where when I think of it from that perspective, I have to give him some credit, actually. Then there's the whole angle of the what if, right? So what if he had stayed in Astralis and hadn't gone to North, right? The reason why, first of all, this is an infuriating angle that people continually take. I get it if they're taking it just as a meme angle, just for banter. Fair enough. That doesn't have to make sense. But if you think you're making a real point, think about this for a second. Most people, in fact, practically everyone from what I've seen, when they did their top 10, top 20 players of 2018 lists, by the way, I'll have one myself forthcoming, won't be that far away. Almost everyone I saw had Magisk, the player who joined instead of kjaerbye, in the top 10. Some people had him very high, and I'm going to go ahead and assume, based on what I saw in the community, practically everyone in this scene would have Magisk in the top 20 players. I know I would. So when you consider Magisk has practically the opposite skill set and playing style to kjaerbye, he's much more of a passive player. He's a guy who just takes on much of opponents. He lets them decide the angle and the timing of when they come, and they just frags them all down with a bunch of crazy spray. Whereas kjaerbye's this like aggressive player who takes duels, makes things happen, play makes, has really nice burst aim, but his spray is a bit janky, which is why people all kept thinking he cheated and that he had some sort of aimbot or something. Totally different players. So quite frankly, they couldn't play the same role. Like, it just wouldn't make sense. Or rather, kjaerbye would be much worse at playing that role. Then consider that at the same time that they had kjaerbye, and now have Magisk, they have Dupree, and who's Dupree become in 2018? What? Astralis was right to give him the emphasis. He has become arguably the best entry fragger in the game, or one of the very best. Better than kjaerbye ever was, I would argue, in Astralis. So when you consider he was doing the same role that kjaerbye had been at his best in Astralis doing, historically, why would you assume that kjaerbye would have had anywhere close to this success? Because Dupree and Magisk don't have an overlap like that. Dupree and kjaerbye do, and you lack what Magisk brought to the team, which for my money, I thought was a little bit overrated in as much as like people don't consider the context of his teammates and his team he played in. But for someone who in theory wasn't the best player in his team, which Magisk wasn't, what an overqualified, not best or second best player to have. It's outrageous the numbers he was able to put up in that spot, right? kjaerbye wouldn't have been doing that. So quite frankly, the role overlap and the lack of Magisk's contribution tell me that you would not have had this Astralis. Then you have to ask yourself, with kjaerbye, what would have happened? Right, like I said, there's a world in which they slip off, actually, and they go down 4th, 5th, 6th. They just become like after the initial period of Mousesports was winning tournaments. You remember that period where they could make semis of a lot of tournaments, but they would always lose to the better teams than them. They would always lose to the elite squads, maybe in 3 maps, but they would just always lose. And it became very frustrating, and that's why they kicked stick out and got snacked. That's where Astralis could have been. And by the way, if they'd have gotten frustrated and they'd have kicked someone, it would have been fucking kjaerbye getting kicked. And so he might have ended up in an even worse scenario than this. I know we can't, now looking at it, it's hard to see how it could end up in a worse scenario, but you can't know where the scene would have been at that point in time. I personally think they might have been good enough on the upside with some of the other changes they made within the organisation, Zonic calling during online games and practice games so Greb could be a better fragger. I could see a world in which they could have made it work and could have vied for the top title. I still don't think they would have been the world number ones, personally. I don't think they would have been the best. I definitely don't think they would have been dominant. I think more likely they would have been in the mix with FaZe, Na'Vi, Mousesports, Team Liquid. All these teams would have won, except for Astralis, more lands that year. Even MIBR might have won a LAN or two. Would have been an incredibly competitive year. And I don't think Astralis would have been the number one. I think overall that might have been, I think it's between Na'Vi, FaZe and Team Liquid most obviously. And it would depend how that ended up working out. If they all met in every final, etc. But I don't think it's that reasonable to suggest they would have done anything that great. I will say, now we know how North went, aside from the fact they did win that one event, Master Stockholm, and obviously the DreamHack Valencia or whatever, it is hard to see how the year could have overall gone as badly as it has. Like, this does seem like almost the worst case scenario. Then you have to add in, that particular lineup obviously didn't work out, and I was somebody who was quite sceptical of Mertz early on into that lineup, so I thought it was right to remove him. But when you consider the talent they still have in Optic, the talent they have in North, they could have made a lineup, if other things had gone on, that could have potentially been as good as the Astralis lineup. Not the one that ended up happening, but what we initially thought when Magus joined, which is like, is this going to change that much? I guess he could do something. Where's Astralis going to go? There weren't. Here's the thing you need to know, okay? There weren't people when Magus joined Astralis saying, this is going to be the number one team. This is clear-cut the best. What an idiot. They weren't saying it on those grounds at all. A lot of people actually were like, let's just fucking wait and see. And if you know Magus wasn't necessarily the first choice for Astralis, even Astralis didn't know that they were going to be that successful. That's why they were so salty at kjaerbye. Now, here's the thing I want to make a point of, okay? The reason why I find it so fucked up that there's all this vitriol against kjaerbye is I'm going to contrast two scenarios for you, because they're two scenarios that happened around a similar time frame roughly, which is kjaerbye leaving Astralis to go to North, which technically never happened, as I'll explain in a second, and Stewie leaving Cloud9 to go to SK and obviously what later became MIBR. Now, you might initially naively think these are similar scenarios. No, they're not at all, because there are very key distinctions and differences in what Stewie did, and in almost every single case, what Stewie did is way more snake-like and way more fucked up on most levels, competitive, like choice of team to go to, circumstances of when you chose to leave, how you left with your teammates, than kjaerbye's. I will say the caveat is, I do think kjaerbye's major fuck-up was keeping it secret from his teammates and then leaving on that day, so he also left his team with not enough time to get it all figured out. He obviously himself knew he was going to sign with North. I do think that part's kind of fucked up, but I'm not that vitriolic against him, because I think he's just a young guy who didn't realise the impact of what he was doing, actually, and maybe was a bit naive. Maybe North told him, oh, keep it secret so no one will find out. Like, I think he was just naive in terms of what he did. I don't think he did it maliciously, and this is something we'll get into later. So let me contrast the Stewie 2K scenario first for you. So most Cloud9 fans don't seem to really blame Stewie 2K. A couple do, but I noticed a lot of them still seem to cheer for him when he was in IBR. A lot of them are still fans of him as a person. A lot of them credit him with helping them win the major. A lot of them look back, because of the great contributions he had to the team, quite favourably on him. And that's this, and they'll use reasoning like, oh, well, automatically told him to take the offer, therefore it's okay, so his teammates were okayed it. They use the logic of, historically MIBR/SK, like their players have one more, so who wouldn't want to play with those legends? That's despite the fact Stewie 2K was still under contract with Cloud9. In fact, worse than that, he had just months earlier signed a new contract for more years, higher salary, which made him the highest paid player in North America. He had just won the major itself, the World Championship, something like 5 lands earlier than when he left, and didn't even wait to ever even get a chance to defend that major title. And on top of that, he still claims to this day that simultaneously he didn't abandon Cloud9, but also that it wasn't a fluke that they won the major and that they could have, followed up on that result, despite that his own actions suggest he didn't believe that, no matter what he says. He went to a direct region rival, because obviously MIBR/SK is in North America competing, so you're actually hurting Cloud9 when you have success there with them potentially. And then after that, after the entire circuitous route of 2018, ended up on Cloud9's direct rival Team Liquid, who he's now helping make better, and potentially better than any Cloud9 lineup ever in history. So, all in all, if you wanted to be kind of vitriolic, I personally would never suggest doing it. You have to make your own mind up on these sorts of things. But I could see how someone could, if there's a Cloud9 fan, could be a bit pissed off with Stewie over that. I still wouldn't say to go fucking ham on him beyond jokes, but I could see how they'd be like that. But no, Stewie 2K pretty universally loved, it feels like. I'm not saying he shouldn't be, but contrast it with how people look at kjaerbye. So kjaerbye wasn't under contract. His contract had ended. He is now a free agent. He is free to sign with anyone he pleases. He went to another Danish team, stayed within his region, didn't go and help a Brazilian team, potentially beat all the NA teams, went to another Danish team. Okay, if you're a fan of Danish CS, you're still cool with that, right? It didn't work out. Okay, it went really badly. How's that even vaguely as bad as the Stewie example? Like, in fact, I'll add in the detail I said earlier. So Stewie left Cloud9 because I think actually deep down he understood what I understood, which is that was a fluke one-off run. Odds are, if you play with Cold Zero and Fallen, you've got to have a better chance to win big tournaments, right? So why not go and do it? Similar, if not a bit more money. Okay, don't have the pressure of being a star and trying to help carry this team that has historically not won many championships. I get it. But the problem is, like I said before, anyone can just go and join what in theory on paper might end up being a better team with historically better players and then go, haha, I made the right choice. Like, I mean, in this case, it didn't even work out for him either. That's why I brought it up. But at the time, people go, well, I could see why he did it. kjaerbye actually was going to do something much more admirable. Try and go and be the star player of a lesser team, make them better than his old team, and become a better team in that way, and thought it made sense for his style of play. All these aspects that didn't make sense for the Stewie angle never made sense. And then people cry about, oh, why are you blaming his numbers? Like he was playing support role. Oh, he joined that team to play fucking support role. Well, then he's out of his own mind, didn't he? That sounds pretty ridiculous, right? Now, I actually do think, I'll make this point at the end, the main reason why people are so vitriolic against kjaerbye is because they don't know kjaerbye that well. They don't know his personality that well. He's from a different culture than them. We're talking mainly about North American fans. So they think that they know Stewie because they've seen interviews with him, or they've seen him stream, or they've seen him talk on Twitter, and they think they know his personality better, and they know some of his backstory now, and so they have a personal connection with him. So just like that famous thing where people who are late might still blame you for being late, because what happens is when they're late, well, they know why, because they know that they themselves are themselves, and they think that they're a good person, and they think that they're punctual, and it doesn't matter how many times they're late, they have an excuse. Oh, I was stuck in traffic, or you wouldn't believe the elevator took longer than it should have. If you're late, you could say all those reasons, but in their mind, they might just go, that's a fucking excuse, and he's always bloody late, or has he fucking come on time? It's easy for them to understand their own situation as opposed to yours. Likewise with their friends. If their friend does something mildly fucked up and gets fired, they're going to agree with their friend perhaps. No, it's fucked up that you got fired. If a separate guy does, well, it's your own fault. Why did you come late? You should have done what the boss said. You know, you shouldn't have back-talked him that time. Like, it's so easy to do that. So I get the phenomenon, what's going on here. It even makes sense when you consider, it's famous if you ever look how many flares there are on Reddit. Like Cloud9 fans are something like 2.5 times the next fan. And the European fans, obviously north and nowhere near that whatsoever. So naturally, you're going to get bias towards Cloud9 on Reddit. Fair enough. But if you contrast these scenarios, I think people go way too hard on the kjaerbye one, especially when they do it in a mean way, like directly to him. And I don't want you to flame Stewie 2K, but if you are someone who thinks that it's fine for Stewie to leave, maybe contrast that and reflect upon how his situation is similar and also different to kjaerbye's, and how, are you being consistent with how you treat those two players? This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, Tristan Jones, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for upcoming content of mine? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want some teasers to see who the next guests are for my talk shows, for my interviews? Maybe you'd like to take part in a monthly esports discussion with yours truly. Well, put your money where your mouth is at the Patreon link in the description box below and join the Scrilluminati today.